Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar where we in the Danish Foreign Policy Society look at how the war in Ukraine affects different regions, economies, and cultures around the world. In today's edition, War and Wheat, we will discuss how Russia's war in Ukraine is currently posing a looming threat to the worldwide food supply, which can lead to a global food crisis. Ukraine and Russia together count for more than 25% of the world's wheat market. The current war, however, is poised to drive up the already soaring food prices across the globe. As history has taught us many times, food instability has the potential to create a large level of social instability in a country. And poor countries in Northern Africa, Asia, and Middle East that depend heavily on wheat imports are therefore at risk. This is what we will discuss today. My name is Ida Spar-Ulrik, and with me I have my colleague Miriam Hadesharif.
Thank you, Ida. So as Ida mentioned, we will delve into two different regions today. We will delve into Niger in West Africa and Bangladesh in South Asia, to learn more about how a European grain crisis manifests in both countries on a civil and political level, and what kind of challenges will arise or are already arising currently. And to discuss this theme, we have three experts with us today. So we have Abdullah Mamoun from the International Food Policy Research Institute, where he's a senior research analyst. We also have Mumuni Apani who is a former graduate from the Copenhagen Business School from the International Business and Politics Department. And Mumuni is from Niamey, Niger, where he works as Policy and Programs Officer at the British Embassy in Niger, where he also follows the impacts of the war in Ukraine closely. And to start off, we have David Laporte, who's a senior research fellow from International Food Policy Research Institute in the US, who will give us sort of a brief overview of what a global food crisis means. So yeah, over to you, David.
Thank you, and thank you for this invitation. So it's a pleasure for me to talk about, it's a pleasure for me to talk with you, but not about this current crisis that actually is going to cause a lot of pain to various places in the world. And the first element of background that I think is important to keep in mind is that this increase in food prices, but also in energy prices and other commodities, has actually started at the beginning of last year, when the world was kind of waking up from the COVID-19 lockdown, and in particular in Asia. China has started to buy a lot of products on global markets, from wheat to oil, iron, and so on. And it has really been a push in demand. And at the same time, due to COVID-19, global value chain, but also local value chain, were still suffering. We also had labor shortage. Some plantation in Southeast Asia were not able to operate properly in Malaysia, for instance, because it relied a lot on seasonal workers. So people that were not able to work. So food supply was restricted. And on top of that, we had a number of climate shock. Some typhoon in Southeast Asia, some drought in Latin America, in particular related to what we call La Niña, that is the mirror effect from El Nino, and that has impacted significantly the production of soybean and other commodities. So we were in a situation at the end of 2021, if you want, where demand was high, supply was low, inventories, so the amount of food, in particular grains we have in stock, were low. And it's typically the situation where any new shock is going to lead to a price hike, because there is basically no buffer, and the system is already under pressure. Pressure from the pandemic, pressure from the weather shock. So, and that was the situation where we were at the beginning of the year, and then the war in Ukraine started, And even the week before the invasion, actually markets were pretty worried, and the price of wheat actually started to increase even before that the invasion started on February the 24th. And that also at that time with few of my colleagues, like Abdullah, that you will have the pleasure to hear about and to hear from in a few minutes, or Joe Glover. We have a series of blogs on the IFPRI website where you can see very specific stories on topics if you want to dig into some of the elements I'm going to refer to. And since then, so price of wheat have really skyrocketed after the invasion, then they decline. And in the last couple of days, they are resurging again due to another shock that I will say a few words later on, that has the export restriction and typical export restriction coming from India. But the current situation is that compared to January 1st, the price of wheat has increased by 64% today. That's a significantly amount, of course, but also the price of corn and soybean are pretty high. So we are going to talk a lot about wheat today, but we really have to think that this crisis goes beyond wheat. And if wheat was potentially the commodity the most directly impacted from what's happened in Ukraine, because as you said, Ukraine and Russia are key wheat producers, but even more key wheat exporters. So we contribute really to the global trade of wheat and the regional trade of wheat, because if you're in Indonesia, you import wheat from Ukraine. But of course, when you're in Indonesia, next door you have also Australia, so you can actually diversify more easily your food supply. When you are in Egypt, the next door markets is the Black Sea. And I will come back to that a bit more in detail. But really, the shock from the Black Sea has directly impacted the wheat markets, the sunflower oil markets, and the corn and barley. But step by step, we have this situation that is growing. Another aspect related to the invasion is we have seen also a shock on oil prices, natural gas prices, and fertilizer prices. The two are, or the three, if you want, are always interlinked. But that's going to be an important concern because even if you just think about wheat, for the next harvest of wheat, we still need also fertilizer. So the question is, today we are already missing the wheat coming from Ukraine that should have come on the regional markets during the first part of this year. And today they cannot. If you follow the news, you will see that still from Odessa, grains is blockaded. You also have description about what Russia is able to send and trade with the rest of the world, because in the Black Sea, maritime transportation has been disrupted, and now with the sanctions, there is various indirect effect, because even if the sanctions doesn't really impact food trade, actually to do business with Russia today is much more difficult. So we don't have this wheat coming from these places. So what we just hope is that more wheat will come from other places. And that's the kind of second layer of policy that we want to look at. And on one end, yes, because fertilizer price and energy price are up, other regions of the world will have more difficulty to produce more wheat, or it will be also just more costly to carry this wheat around when the oil price is high. Then, unfortunately, for some of the wheat that is already planted, and that was planted last winter, we had negative weather shock in the US, in Canada with some drought. We also have right now in Western Europe, when a few weeks ago we were still expecting very good crops, there is some dry condition, and also in some places a kind of heat wave. And in the last couple of months, we had a similar situation in India or in Pakistan, where also we were expecting relatively good harvests, where we are thinking that this country can contribute to the global market this year, and so to try to stabilize the markets. Bad weather conditions are reducing the supply, and on top of that, what I will call bad policy decision, like the export ban that India has announced, because it takes step by step each exporter out of the market, it shrinks the market even more, prices go even more, and all the remaining exporters start to have the main incentive to also start to put this export ban. So step by step, you are killing the situation. And because all these policies are pushing all prices up, it means that every country in the world at the end has to pay more for importing food. So, and I will conclude just by this kind of effect is, yes, next day after the invasion, the countries that were the most vulnerable were Egypt, Lebanon, Tunisia, Sudan, Djibouti, Yemen. So countries that are directly buying from the Black Sea. And due to the war, they were not able to buy because basically transportation was disrupted. But then you have to look to find other countries that are ready to sell their goods. And then they start to compete with other buyers in Latin America, with other buyers in Australia, so that pushes price up. But unfortunately, then you see export restriction. And of course, we had started to see export restriction or increase export taxes on wheat coming from also actually Russia, coming from Kazakhstan, so in Central Asia. Now we have the export ban in India. And depending on the week or the month, you don't exactly know what Argentina is doing. Sometimes they restrict it, sometimes it doesn't restrict it. So that creates a lot of uncertainty and that pushes this price up. So that's the situation where we are. And so initially, I would say the North Africa and Western Asia were really very vulnerable to this wheat shortage and price hike. And also due to the role of the price of bread in their political stability, there are various implications of the crisis. But step by step, the crisis is radiating, if you want. More and more countries are impacted. More and more commodities are impacted, in particular, the vegetable oil market also right now is in turmoil. And more we see a policy response that are less and less cooperative and more selfish, combining these things. Now, just maybe a few words of hope. Okay, we still have wheat in the world. It's not like there's no more wheat and everyone has to start to pile up flowers or a bag of bread. No, and please don't start to pile up food. You are just going to make the crisis worse by panicking and hoarding. The reality that price is becoming food is becoming more expensive, and for the poorest country, and so the poor people within this country, that's where they are suffering. That's where we see rising undernourishment, rising malnutrition, because in some cases, when the price of wheat goes up, people doesn't eat less wheat. They just have to spend more money on wheat, but they have to spend less money on other better food that is good for their nutrition. And last but not, I will say, but not least, that's where basically we need also to think about global solidarity or social safety net, or the way to support countries to pay their import bill in the middle of the crisis, and that government can protect the most vulnerable people within their countries from the shock. We should not insulate everyone, but at least we should insulate the people that are on the front line. And countries that were already in a kind of war situation or very acute food insecurity, like Yemen, like some part of Sudan, like part of Ethiopia, that's where actually we are going to see more widespread famine. So the war in Ukraine is not directly creating famine worldwide, but for situations where we were at the margin, that's the kind of last drop that overfilled the cup. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for this presentation and for giving an overview of the situation, which was very informative. I have just 2 questions before we move on. You talk about this current situation where we have export bans, and you also give us the advice not to buy up wheat because this will only make the problem worse. Are the export bans that we see, can you just put some more words on why do we see these, and do they also contribute to making the problems worse, like, and how?
So you're totally right. They make the situation worse, But also, I will say that for some government, that the equivalence of panicking, meaning that, and there's a kind of self-realization of your fears, meaning that you start to see price increase on world market. And if you are an exporter, of course, your domestic price is going to be linked about what's on the world market. Your farmers, and we should never forget that farmers need to sell at good price for having a good livelihood. Okay, they are not like the richest people on earth. Okay, including in India. And so when you see price rising, it's normally good news for the farmers. And at one point, people want to stop that and they want to keep food at home. And so that's why government put export ban. On one hand, it's a problem because your farmers are not going to get a good price for what they have produced, because finally you try to force them to sell domestically at a lower price. But until a few weeks ago, the Indian farmers, for once, will have a good price for their wheat, and they were very happy. And now what the government is saying is, no, don't sell at a price that is too high. When also farmers in various places, not so much in India, but in various places, have to pay much more for their fertilizer. So when you start to say to people, don't sell at a high price your food or your wheat, but you still have to pay a lot for your fertilizer, then you create a condition that basically reduce the incentive for farmers to produce more or to plant more for the next season, and you start to have a vicious circle. So that's why we are very careful about this export restriction, because first, by stopping export, you are shrinking the world markets. So you are even reducing supply, so price go up more. And so you have more and more countries that want to do the same. So there is here a kind of domino effect that is going to lead to this deterioration. Knowing that you still have countries that have to import, food. Just also an example. This year we have Morocco. Morocco, due to the drought, is going to lose half of its cereal production. So it's totally normal for Morocco, when they have this type of shock, to go on world market to buy it. But if everyone has just closed the shop because it's everyone for himself, and we don't want to basically trade, rebalance the system, because trade is about balancing supply and demand at the global level. And if you try to block it, then you have this type of problem. You have this vicious circle about the incentive on your farmers. And maybe last but not least, it's not because you keep food at home that the most vulnerable people in your country will get it. It's not because you don't let a cargo of wheat leave in your country that the very poor in your country will get this wheat. So in general, it's a kind of a band-aid on the wooden leg, if you want. That's an announcement that is very strong from a policy communication point of view. I protect you. I keep all food at home. But in terms of efficiency on the short and medium run, actually, there is a very poor records about these policies. And that's why, as economists, in general, we complain about it. Even if from a purely political point of view, we can understand why they are liked.
But from a global political point of view, you mentioned that solidarity and a more solidarity in the global system would be a good solution. Do you have any suggestions, or how do you picture this solidarity happen? Because in the UN, or I mean, how would that work?
Actually, I have a follow-up to that, because we also heard about sort of global solidarity when it came to the rollout of vaccines in accordance to COVID-19, and we saw that there was a drop in global solidarity. Do you think that this war perhaps will lead us to have more empathy for each country, also when it comes to something like the prices of wheat and export bans?
Yes, so that's where the situation is are going to be a bit ambiguous, in the sense that, yes, we need more cooperation, we need more collaboration, but we don't have really any tool right now to enforce it. So what we have seen at the beginning of 2020 during the COVID-19 crisis is that some countries start to put restriction on even food products. But with dialogues, and in particular within the G20 and one institution called AMIS, that is the Agricultural Market Information System that were put in place after the food price crisis of 2011, countries have understood that their policy were a bit too extreme and that a way to cooperate. And we do it on the food market, but they have not really done it on the medical equipment or vaccine. And even the most advanced economy or the biggest economy that try to give the right example didn't really follow it. So what we try is to make sure that this policy dialogue take place. We also try to make sure that government have the right amount of information to avoid panicking. And we also try to promote this fora where people can discuss. But that's so far where we can go. Now there is talks at the WTO to see how we can put some disciplines on this export restriction. But that's a discussion that we had for more than 10 years, including just on, humanitarian shipments. So basically the type of food that the World Food Program is buying, today, country can still block it. And just for that, for the last 10 years, we tried to say, okay, can we avoid to block this type of shipment? And a few countries, in particular, India, Argentina, even Tanzania, that are countries that are used to use this type of instrument, have always opposed that even humanitarian shipments are protecting from export restriction. So the best way for us to try to convince this country to rethink this type of behavior is really to show them that that's not really helping their situation. That, we can tell them, oh, what you do is bad for the others, but at one point, that's not really something that convinces policymakers. Now, when you try to show that actually it doesn't really help their countries and can hurt their farmers, that's where we start to see that there is potentially a way to solve the problem.
Thank you so much, David. Let's move on to one of our two countries that we will discuss today, namely Bangladesh. I will just give a brief graphic overview of some of the things that you should pay attention to about this country in terms of the global food crisis before moving on to Abdullah. So we have here Bangladesh, a country which has a population of 165 million people. The annual wheat import is 6 million tons, which is a lot. And 58% of this wheat comes from Russia and Ukraine. The key issues regarding Bangladesh is that the country's undernourished population actually declined from a high of 16% in 2000 to as low as 9.7% in 2019. And this development, which is positive, is now being threatened by the crisis in the global wheat market. On to you, Abdullah, can you tell us about the situation in Bangladesh right now?
Thank you. This is a nice introduction, what you have just shown that the Bangladesh where but I would like to go deeper into the Bangladesh situation now, where we stand in terms of food security. And as David nicely put it, into the Bangladesh is not insulated from the trade exposure for some of the key commodities. And Bangladesh, as you see, the Bangladesh is a net food importing country, where Bangladesh relies on for some of the essential commodities like wheat, vegetable oils, and I'll also talk about the fertilizer, which is very highly linked with the future production or the high yield of different commodities. Bangladesh has historically, if you look at very high reliance on rice. For 68% of total calorie consumption is actually coming from rice, and only 7% is from wheat. But despite that, as you put it here, that Bangladesh imported 6 million tons of wheat, and 58% of is coming from Ukraine and Russia, was coming from Ukraine and Russia. But after this, all these export restriction and the sanctions that we see, these 6 million tons of wheat import is in jeopardy, basically. So how this Bangladesh is currently managing the situation is, as we see, and I was reading some news just yesterday that they were relying on some of the wheat from India and Canada. Initially, this share of our trade with India was very low, very like around 7%. But now, in last 2 months, that share has driven up to 24%. Around 21% is from Canada. But you also have to look at a very deep level, like from Bangladesh can source wheat from Canada and Australia, but those wheat are actually from for more improved or high-ended variety of wheat. Whereas from India, we could easily import the wheat that are commonly consumed by the poorest segment of the people in Bangladesh. So this is the export restriction that you saw just a couple of days back by India is actually putting a huge food security crisis for Bangladesh. Only good news is that in the letter that the India imposed the restriction on wheat, they said that the order made by some countries, they can still import wheat from India. But we need to see that how the Indian government respond to this crisis. Already, if I have the correct figure, that 500,000 tons of wheat has been ordered from India. But against the 6 million tons of wheat, it is still quite a low amount. So we need to search for wheat from other countries like Canada and Australia. So this is the overall situation in wheat. But to understand the food security in situation in Bangladesh, you have to go also to analyze the import reliance on vegetable oils. For vegetable oils, Bangladesh actually relied 95% of vegetable oils are imported from externally, like Indonesia, Malaysia, soybean oil from Argentina and Brazil. So now you have seen that the restriction were put by Indonesia, palm oil restriction. So this is putting a huge pressure on Bangladeshi people and Bangladesh government as well. So if you look at the impact on the monetary impact, there is a huge trade deficit right now, like around $18 billion of trade deficit as of in this current fiscal year. Bangladesh is incurring. So what does it mean? It means that you basically you're putting pressure on the reserve in Bangladesh, foreign currency reserve, and you lessening your scope for social safety net measures, which Bangladesh ran for, like free food distribution, public food distribution, or the social welfare program, or the pension schemes for elderly people. So all these programs will be affected by this crisis. So and on the side note, I mean, this is, if you take a big picture, I mean, I was looking at the state of the food security and nutrition report, which is published from the FAO. The big number is that you have 10% of the people of these 165 million people are actually highly food insecure, and another 32% is moderately food insecure, according to the measure by FAO. So all these, the Ukraine war and the subsequent food export restriction and the fertilizer restriction is putting huge pressure on Bangladesh. And in the coming year, in this current fiscal year, we are not sure that how they will be, some of these commodities, wheat, the vegetable oils and fertilizer will be sourced if the current export restrictions are in place for an indefinite period. So this is, I can tell you about the current situation in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdullah. I would just like to ask two questions. So the first one is actually how much is wheat a part of the sort of national food or cuisine of Bangladesh? How much does it take space out of an average family when they go to dinner? And then I'm also interested in this, if you could put some more words into the export ban by India. How was it received in Bangladesh, and how much of wheat from India was expected to make up the loss from the wheat from Ukraine and Russia?
Thank you. This is really important question you have raised. Actually, as I said previously, that wheat actually only 7% of total calorie consumption is from wheat. But here's the point: in Bangladesh, actually, you have 2 meals, which is based on rice. But in the morning, you have to have a bread, and which is mainly we consume wheat. So this reliance is high, I would say. Now the question is whether there will be substitution due to this high price of wheat and caused by the export restriction. That's a big question. For the poorest segment of the people, probably they will switch to consume more rice. The good thing is that Bangladesh is producing high amount of rice. That's on the positive side. But you have to think about also the side effect, how the side effect is coming, because in that case, if you switch to wheat to rice, the rice price will also go high, right? And also you have a high price of vegetable oils, and which is don't forget that the vegetable oil is from the culinary perspective. Vegetable oil actually constitute a very core element of the food. Without vegetable oil, basically you don't cook anything, any curry, either it beef or fish or vegetables. So all together, the vegetable oils, mainly palm oil and the soybean oil, and this wheat is really putting a lot of pressure on Bangladesh people. Now, coming to your second question is that on the wheat import from India. As I have seen just a few news that already Bangladesh, the market is actually rattled by this export restriction, and the traders are not sure when the orders that they have made before the declaration of this export restriction by India will arrive, whether they will preserve the order. That is not sure. But this is definitely will have a huge impact for the wheat consumers in Bangladesh. And on the makeup point, like as I have seen, there was some discussion going on with Canada at the moment, whether they can provide additional wheat. That discussion also will take a little bit of time, and also whether the Canada will be able to supply that amount. Bangladesh will also need to look forward to Australia, and but if you see, as you see the distance, as David talked about, the transport distance is also will have a higher impact on the price of wheat. Bangladesh will have to keep that in mind.
Thank you, Abdullah. I was curious about, or I wanted to ask you about, if we picture a situation where this development is not getting better, but maybe is getting worse. The war in Ukraine continues, and the global food prices rises. There will be, experts say, risk of social instability and and uprising in some countries. What are your thoughts and perspectives on Bangladesh in this? Which consequences could there be?
Yeah, you're right. Historically, there are precedences, right? So on when there is the high food prices, we have seen that in 2008. We have seen that not so much in Bangladesh during the pandemic period, because in the pandemic period there was a more demand side shock. But now this time is a supply side shock. On the supply side, it's not more about availability, but more of affordability, because all the prices are going up. I just read another news from Bangladesh that the average price of essential commodities actually has risen from during January to March 7%. And it ranges from 2 to 20%. But this will, what I see is the immediate effect is that Bangladesh is, the government is currently managing this through the open market sale to providing like at a reduced price. They are selling, the government is selling essential food commodities like wheat, rice, and vegetable oils. This is actually cutting the wallet of the fixed income people as well, who were currently employed. Not only just the day laborers, or not only the poor segment of the people. So the people are lining up in the queue to buy these essential commodities at a reduced price from the government they call it Trading Corporation of Bangladesh, TCB line. So we have seen the news. Instability, yeah, this is surely will create some problem in Bangladesh. Now the question is, will there be a political instability? We need to see how that will people will react. But it is definitely impacting, hurting the people who are in need of food.
Thank you. Moving on to Nisha and Mamuni, I will just, as with Bangladesh, show a quick graphic presentation before we delve deeper. So, as we also have mentioned, Nisha is in West Africa, and it currently has a population of 24 million people. It is estimated that in 2050, the year of 2050, the population in Nisha will be 70 million people, which is quite a rise. The country currently imports 300,000 tons of wheat each year. And the reason we have chosen Nisha for this webinar is the key issue of this fast population growth. Nisha has the fastest population growth in the world, and a global food crisis leaves Nisha particularly vulnerable. Yeah, I'll just stop sharing. Maui, can you put some words on the situation in Nisha?
Yes, thank you very much, President Ida, and thank you also, David, for the insightful. So regarding Niger, I think I should begin by saying the crisis that Niger, the multidimensional crisis that Niger currently faces, especially with regards to food prices, results from not only exogenous factors, notably the situation of the global commodity markets resulting from the Ukrainian conflict, but also from endogenous factors relating to the insecurity situation in the country. To some extent, population growth, and also the deficit, harvest deficit observed almost to a year-to-year basis, but this past year, 2021, it's been quite dramatic. Niger is basically had its worst harvest in about 20 years, and the country is in a situation where, without intervention, it was estimated that there would be potential famine in some areas. But going back to again an explanation of the situation, I think I'll begin with basically a breakdown of how exactly the rise in wheat prices immediately affected Nigerian citizens, as well as what sort of social impact it had. Because it is quite, as you mentioned, an important element. Rising food prices, especially in countries that are already vulnerable, can lead to socio-political incidents. So with regards to Niger, the rise in wheat prices, effectively, as David mentioned, preceded news of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I would say ever since the month of around October and November, price of wheat has been increasing. It's been mainly noticed in the increase in the price of bread, which increased from about 200 francs, or 150 francs in some areas, to around 200 to 200 francs. This was something that was widely protested throughout the country, although not in a very visible way. There were many calls for protests that were put in place, but of course here people need authorization to protest, and the government has, of course, due to many reasons, including the COVID-19 situation, including the security situation, discouraged many of these protests from happening. Here in Niamey, for example, we were aware of about 3 protests that basically were supposed to be taking place. Now, usually these protests were not solely based on the increase in the price of bread, but the increase in the price of bread was utilized by civil society and political actors as another tipping point for a lot of the issues that some parts of civil society have. So regarding corruption, issues with corruption and governance, regarding the worsening security situation, regarding anti-Western sentiments, notably relating to the security situation. If you follow in the news, it's been quite the situation in Mali and the redeployment of French troops, and European troops as well under the Barkhane and Takuba setup has been quite widely debated here. But anyways, as I was saying, the increase in the price of wheat was mainly used as sort of a tipping point for a lot of the issues that people had with the government. Reactions from the government on this mainly involved personal communication. People weren't aware that this issue was supply side, and reactions involved communication as well as consultation with the union, wheat, trade unions, basically. This is where it was revealed that indeed the increase in the price of wheat, in the price of bread in Niger, was directly correlated with the increase in the price of the international commodity markets. And there were calls for the government to basically either subsidize bread and bread derivatives in Niger. But I would just like to say that from a policy space perspective, the government had already exhausted quite a few policy levers with regards to basic food products. So since 2019, the Nigerian government has removed any value-added tax with regards to certain basic food products, including wheat, cooking oil, locally produced cereals such as millet, corn. And the only policy that the government, the only policy that the government instilled regarding this increase in the price was a reduction in tariffs regarding wheat imports of about 3.5%, which, as you can tell, given the increase, the double-digit increase in the price of wheat in global markets, as well as the nearly 40 or 50% increase locally here in Niger, such policy didn't have an effect. It was criticized to not have any effect. So right now we're in a situation where it doesn't seem like the government is planning to proceed with any more policy directly addressing the increase in the price of wheat. There are still talks of instilling more direct subsidies so that the actual final price that consumers have to pay would be lower. But again, given already given the government's budget, which is already under pressure, it may not likely be the case. I would just like to also say that regionally, again, the idea of banning exports to other countries, it's something that was also observed. I believe in March, Algeria banned exports of any food products, including wheat, cooking oil, sugar. The same was observed as well with Nigeria. Now, Algeria is one of the largest wheat importers in the region, and Niger, I've been trying to find actual statistics, but Niger to some extent indirectly imports wheat from Russia and Ukraine through Algeria and Nigeria, Niger being a landlocked country. So these policies will indeed have an impact on the price. The situation isn't improving, and so far it isn't clear exactly what the government has to do about it. It is something that is still in the mind of many Nigerians today. Answering, I think, Miriam's question regarding whether the extent to which wheat is incorporated in Nigerian cuisine, I would say, given estimate, be about 25%. So wheat is mainly consumed here in the form of bread, but most bread, to some extent, pasta, and even more rarely couscous. But mostly people consume, again, rice, as well as locally produced cereals, such as porridges made out of millet, sorghum, and so this is what this is the effect that the increase in the price of wheat has had on the socio-political context here in Niger. But I would just like to now frame it in the context of the overall food insecurity crisis that Niger was going through. So Niger is a country, well, now I guess approaching 26 million actually, where 80% of the population relies on sustenance agriculture, which is also mostly rainfall based, resulting in a lot of variability in terms of harvests. When rainy seasons are either unpredictable or so with regards to this, the past rainy season has been quite irregular, resulting in a lot of rainfall in condensed periods and dry seasons within the rainy season. The rest of over the rest of the season, this resulted in in addition to the insecurity crisis that the country has been going through since 2010, notably in the fact that through some parts of Niger, southwestern Niger, for example, where the country shares a border with Mali and Burkina Faso, an area that is heavily impacted by attacks from violent extremist groups, as well as in its border with northeastern Nigeria, and now actually with northwestern Nigeria. There are many areas where normally crop planting activities, agricultural activities have been suspended because of insecurity. There has been a lot of internal displacement, and it has become the modus operandi of a lot of these violent extremist groups to actually attack people in the field while they're working in the field. So these the unsatisfactory and irregular rainfall, in addition to the insecurity observed in some parts of the country, has resulted in a harvest season that, on average, is a deficit of around 40% on average this harvest season, and the increase in the price of wheat, despite wheat not being necessarily not taking a huge share of Nigerians' food consumption, is yet again another point of pressure for Niger. I would like to recall that with regards to the food insecurity crisis, around 4.4 million people are basically food insecure and will be needing humanitarian assistance. And as is often the case, multilateral humanitarian organizations, including the World Food Program, depend on the acquisition of wheat and other derivatives to meet humanitarian needs. So the country finds itself in a situation where humanitarian assistance will be needed for a huge share of the population, but even that humanitarian assistance might be more difficult to come by. Of course, regionally, Niger, Sahel isn't the only region taking sub-Saharan Africa affected. East Africa is also going through, some parts of East Africa are also going through climate-related food insecurity crises. So at a more global level, I would say the rise in global commodity markets of these food products not only limits the response that national governments can have on their own population, but it also may have a negative impact on humanitarian response programs in a context where resources already seem to be split quite thin. Another point I would like to bring up is, again, the issue of fertilizer. This year, the harvest in Niger is predicted to be, the rainy season is predicted to be abundant, although forecasts are still unclear regarding its regularity. So it may be a lot of rainfall in one condensed period, which may actually contribute to flooding and loss of crops. Or there may be more regular rainfall, which may contribute to a good harvest period. But again, the fact that there is and there may continue to be a shortage with regards to potassium fertilizer, which is also used here in Niger, may have a negative impact on food security. I believe I've exhausted all my points here, and yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much, Mamoni. It was very interesting and illuminating also to hear a little bit about the regional consequences of a food crisis. Can you maybe put a few more words on these regional aspects in Western Africa, Sahel, maybe in terms of how the countries interact and can cooperate or reversely be in conflict with each other due to food crisis? Which impacts would this have regionally?
It's a bit unclear to say. Of course, the banning of exports is not something that's new to the region. Nigeria, for example, a few years ago in 2019, banned exports of some products that some crops that it produces, including rice. It's also observable with regards to particular crops as well. Export bans have also been observed with regards to corn and I believe sugar as well from Burkina Faso and Benin, given shortages. I would say it depends on the extent to which countries like Niger, for example, would be realistically be able to find substitutes. But I would say the consequences of, for example, Algeria's export ban or Nigeria's export ban, or at least here, given the national context, have been. It's something that's discussed in a way, but we're not really, from an analytical perspective, we're not really seeing exactly what it would result to.
I also have a quick question. So you mentioned that importation of wheat from Russia and Ukraine sort of is not directly headed towards Niger, but comes in through Nigeria or Algeria. But do you know, or do you have any incline or idea why there's no direct trading between these two regions? Is it because Niger is a landlocked country, or do you have an idea why it goes through other countries before it comes to Niger?
I would say that is mainly the reason why. Niger is a landlocked country, and it imports, in a way, indirectly a lot of goods, most notably from Nigeria, which is the largest trading partner within the region. And also with regards to derivatives of products from wheat, notably pasta, for example. I would say the industry is much more mature in a country like Algeria, for example, than it is even locally. Likewise for Nigeria. So Niger also imports products in which wheat is a very important input from countries like Algeria.
Thank you very much. I think, David, if you are still on board with us, you had the sort of overview perspective in the beginning of this webinar, and now we've tried to dive down into the situation in Bangladesh and in Niger. And we have talked about the risk of social instability in terms of inside the country, and we have also touched upon regional conflicts due to food crisis. Globally, what are your thoughts? We can start off by talking about the regional conflicts. Can you predict anywhere else in the world where a food crisis and very high prices could cause turmoil regionally?
So, of course, there is the whole region of North Africa that we didn't discuss so much. At the same time, it has been discussed a lot in the media and things like this, and people have in mind what was the Arab Spring about, and some of these were driven by increase of the cost of living, in particular for food and oil. Now, just the level of political instability depends really of the current situation in a specific country. I mean, we may not see something similar to the Arab Springs, where all the countries are kind of falling with a domino effect. But some countries that are particularly exposed to the shock and have a very weak level of institution right now, like Lebanon, of course, was a big concern. Syria, there is still a war going on. Morocco is pretty stable, and so should be able to go through the crisis. Tunisia is more exposed. Libya, there is a lot of uncertainty, you see. So that's the type of situation, but there is concern. Then in South Asia, you have heard from the situation in Bangladesh. Of course, there is a situation in Sri Lanka. So just to make clear, the situation in Sri Lanka is not only the consequence of the war. There is a lot of macroeconomic issue before, some bad policy choices before. This war is just putting a bit more oil on already in a house that were already burning. But now you have countries like Nepal that were doing relatively good until now. They have been impacted by the crisis. The new export ban from India also makes things more difficult from them. So South Asia is a region, I would say, moderately at risk. We can see also some trouble going in, for example, in the Caribbean, in the sense that insular economies are really dependent on what's happened on world markets, because they are highly specialized. So some actually, like Trinidad and Tobago, are going to do fine because they produce fossil fuel. They even export a lot of fertilizer. It's offshore activities. But other countries like Jamaica or, of course, Haiti are totally exposed to this type of shock. So you know that, and normally the economy also are working with tourism. Since COVID-19, there is no more tourism. So you have also a macroeconomic situation that was weak from the beginning. And this type of shock is exposing. I mean, in Africa, the energy price is going to be a concern, and overall prices is concerned. In the Horn of Africa, we have also a drought, so that put pressure on Somalia, that put pressure on South Sudan. So a number of countries, or even Kenya, are going to be exposed, but not so much you see through the crisis. It's just the fact that because they have a local shock, and they will not be able to use the rest of the world to mitigate their local shock, then they are in trouble. And I think the big question mark we have for the future is just to make sure also that the rice market is not disrupted in the coming months. And it can be due to what's happened on the fertilizer markets, because, you know, in the world, you have different, I would say, main diets. You have the wheat consumers, you have the corn consumers in Central America, and of course, you have the rice consumer in many Asian countries. And right now, rice still behaving. Vegetable oil are expensive, but rice still behaving. So the pressure on, I would say, the common people is not too extreme now. But then if you start to add, you may see, you know, more problem in Myanmar, more problem potentially in Thailand. You know, that's what you don't want to see. But yes.
Thank you so much, David. I truly hope we won't come to that stage, and I will keep my eyes open to rice prices. But yeah, thank you to all of you, David Laporte, Abdullah Mamoun, Mamouni Mara Abani, and yeah, for enlightening us. I sure have become very much wiser the past hour, and I hope that the audience has as well. So thank you so much for your participation.